Hi, I'm Trevor Conquergood. Welcome to this week's R&K Software Club's video of the week. And this week what we're going to talk about is a cool effect that you can use to apply what we call a vintage effect to an embroidery design. And first of all, the design I'm looking at is one of the free member-exclusive designs for people that are in the R&K Software Club, and it's the Happy Thanksgiving design for November 2019. In other words, if I just browse to the Floriani workspace and browse to the library tab on the right-hand side and scroll down to November 2019. Now, to see the designs that are in November 2019, you bring your mouse and hover over the Designs tab. And the first thing I want to point out is that I'm waiting for an update on the software just because normally we don't display JPEGs in here. Normally we just have the embroidery designs in here. And so I think with the update, something kind of got added, and it's obviously not working correctly because it's trying to display the JPEGs, but they don't actually show up. So you're getting a blank image. And so expect that to be corrected in the near future. And the intention is to go back to the way it was before, where it just showed embroidery designs and not the actual photographs of them. Anyhow, this is the design that I was talking about, this Happy Thanksgiving. I'm just going to bring it onto my screen. And when I created the design for Happy Thanksgiving, we actually made two different sizes. So this is the one that was made to fit the 5x7 hoop, and you can see in here that there's a bit of notes. It says, however, you can make it bigger without too much troubles. If you make it much bigger, a good suggestion is to use bean stitch for the run lines, and that will basically make them a little bit more bold and help you see them. If you try and resize it smaller, you may need to add some pull compensation to the stylized wheat to help it from becoming too skinny. And so those are notes that we put in there to try and help you so that if you want to take this design and, select it, and like I said, if you want to make it smaller, I anticipate the letters are going to be fine. But here in the wheat, this is what I'm saying, it starts to get kind of skinny. And so, if I ungroup it, so I'm just going to click on the ungroup tool. These little columns of the wheat, if they get too skinny, they might not sew well. And that's where I was saying you might have to go in and increase their pull compensation, And I put 0.2 on them already. So if you're finding they're getting too skinny, come in here and change that to be 0.3 and you'll see what it does. It kind of just fattens them up that little bit. So yeah, anyway, those are some notes. To be honest, it's a fairly easy design for changing sizes of. In fact, I actually created two sizes of the design. So here I'm just going to start a new empty design space and then browse to that Designs tab again and see there was the Thanksgiving 5x7, and then I made Thanksgiving 8x10 with a vintage look. So let's bring that design on screen. You see right away, you'll probably notice here, let's turn on 3D view. You'll probably notice how far apart those stitches appear. And that's because we used a special effect in the software that creates a vintage look. And if you look at the stitch outs that I created for these, let's see if I can flip to the next photograph. Oh, I see why it's zoomed in or something like that. That's why there's zoom out. And then I can go to the next photograph. So yeah, so basically, can you see that vintage look? What it does is it spreads the stitches out, and then it stitches each stitch multiple times, and you get to choose whether it's 3 or 5 or 7. But the idea is it takes your regular sort of Floriani embroidery thread and makes it look like old-fashioned hand embroidery floss. And so this is like a close-up of what it turns out like. So when I made the bigger size of the Thanksgiving, I converted the satin columns of the letters to have a satin repeat. And I selected the sort of run lines of the little details and turned them into a bean stitch. And so what we're talking about here is, for example, this is the run stitch details that I was talking about. And if okay, it's grouped again, so I'm going to click on ungroup so that I can select just one piece at a time. And what I'm saying is with this one piece here, the change that I made to make it more successful for the larger size was to come over to the properties box and not on the actual run tab, but the next one over is called Run Extra. And you'll see here that in Run Extra, you can apply a bean stitch. And once you choose a bean stitch, then it's either 3 or 5 or 7 or 9 or 11. And I just simply chose 3. And what 3 does is, it does each stitch 3 times. So if I zoom in really closely over top of that area, and maybe even travel through the stitches to get to it. Oh, look, that's the first thing of the design. Now that's helpful. And what you'll see is that it does each stitch that's going to go forward, back, forward, forward, back, forward, forward, back. And so each one of those stitches gets done forward, back, and forward again before moving on to the next forward, back, forward again. And so that's why we call it a triple stitch or a bean stitch. And it makes that line much, much more substantial, and so at a larger size, the sort of thicker lines help it to stand out and not look a little bit sort of skinny. So that was one change. That's what gives it a bit of a vintage look, the bean stitch for the run stitches. And then obviously it's the sort of extra spacing. Like if I go back to the original 5x7 design here, you'll see that this is what you kind of typically see for an embroidery column, what we would call, solid embroidery. And what I did was I selected that orange color and changed it from, so on the fill tab in the properties, it's still a satin fill. But what I change is the number of repeats. See, there's a little tab in here that you probably don't always notice. It says repeats number 1. If I change that to repeats 3, it automatically adjusts the density. And when I hit apply, you'll see that each one of those columns becomes quite spaced out. And so that's what I did to create the design over here that I finished and stitched out. I simply used the satin repeats and the run repeats. And so I really love the effect. And now I decided to only apply that satin repeat to the words happy and Thanksgiving. And I kind of left the wheat as it was. And that doesn't mean you couldn't have done the wheat as a, with the vintage look as well, just to show you what it would have looked like. Basically the same idea. It's going to make it thicker lines. And so, I'm not saying it's wrong. Go ahead and make an edit to the design and stitch it out yourself. If you'd like to see vintage stitching for the wheat as well as the Happy Thanksgiving, that is entirely possible. So yeah, and this is what I'm saying. When you're finished, you end up with an appearance like this. I also stitched the design on white using a variegated thread, which kind of gave this is still the larger one, and so if I zoom in on it, you'll see that it still has that vintage effect, but instead of just doing a solid color, I went with a variegated. It kind of gave it a bit more of a fun and feel to it, but actually, at the end, I kind of felt like I liked it better with the sort of orange color on the dark fabric. It helps show off the vintage look a little bit more, is all I was seeing. So yeah, anyway, you guys, as always, I hope you have a wonderful week. Thanks for watching the R&K Softwares Club's video of the week. And until next time, have a great day. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.